Welcome to Speaking of Service, the podcast that uncovers practical ways to grow service revenue, control costs, and improve customer satisfaction. If you're looking to innovate, gain a competitive edge, or just learn about the latest service trends, you've come to the right place. Today, Chris Wolf joins John Ragsdale, researcher and VP, Technology Ecosystems, TSIA, to discuss progressive AI technology in service. They delve into how service organizations can reap the rewards of more intelligent solutions, especially around predicting issues and understanding patterns.
For more than 30 years, the Technology Services Industry Association, or TSIA, has been conducting research on behalf of its members who are who's who of Silicon Valley, the leading technology makers in the world. As more and more of us are consuming technology in every machine that we have, the research that TSIA provides is becoming much more relevant to our Speaking of Service listeners. So it's my absolute pleasure to invite one of TSIA's most tenured researchers, John Ragsdale, who's currently their VP of Ecosystem Research, to join us here at Speaking of Service. John, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Wolfie. It's great to be here.
Tell me a little bit about TSIA as though I've never heard of you.
Okay. Well, I've been on board for 17 years, and I originally was brought in from Forrester Research to start a research organization back in 2006. So we had an original focus on technical support and field service, and we've expanded into professional services, managed service, education services, huge customer success practice. And now we're even getting into the sales side, creating offers, selling in e-commerce. So more and more of the customer life cycle. But our core value is our members contribute hundreds of metrics about their operations, financial productivity metrics, organizational structures, financial metrics, qualitative metrics, and we do a lot of correlation on practices to results. So when you become a member, we benchmark you and we show you exactly how you compare to the industry, to other companies just like yourself, and you identify where you want to improve, and we give you a roadmap based on that analysis that says, if you want to move these specific metrics, these are the processes or the capabilities that you need in order to do it. So we have about 350 member companies. And as you said, it's all the big Silicon Valley names. We've got a lot now, European and Asian companies. They're all B2B hardware and software companies.
Fantastic. I dusted off my bookshelf and I rescanned the complexity avalanche and crossing the services chasm, even the technology as a service playbook. You know, consumption economics are coming to our listeners every day. Talk to me a little bit about the trends that you're seeing for manufacturers outside of the pure play tech OEMs.
I just pulled some data yesterday. The percentage of companies that say that the technology they sell is highly complex has gone from 17% in 2007 to 72% today. And in many ways, the companies answering those surveys haven't changed that much. We still have a lot of the core big numbers that we did back then. And definitely that complexity is allowing us to be more sophisticated, but it also is making it very hard sometimes for customers to get value from the technology. And in a subscription world and a customer success world, if you're not adopting and getting value, you don't renew contracts. And it used to be so easy to sell shelfware. You would get all the money for the deal up front, and if the customer didn't get value and didn't use it, that was their problem. But today, we've got to make sure they're getting value, and that is completely changing what services means. It's not just maintenance anymore. It's value-added services. It's helping them really accelerate time to value. It's helping them really identify what additional products and services could they be consuming to ultimately even accelerate value more. So services is playing a much more strategic role than it did in those on-premise days. And I think particularly with complex technology and industrial equipment, the ability to really better understand what they're doing with the technology, how they're consuming it. We've talked previously, now they're starting to sell on an outcome based. So you're paying by how many widgets you produce in the factory, or how much time that jet engine is up in the air, or how many x-ray scans you're doing. And that's getting into some pretty sophisticated monitoring to really understand.
Well, you've said a lot in that sentence, and I think the famous example of Rolls-Royce getting paid by the hour that an engine is in use, that's something that we've all heard about, but thought was the domain of companies like Rolls-Royce. And yet those matters are coming to Main Street. Recently, TSIA published the State of Support Services for 2023 and broke down in some nice detail chunky pieces about why this year is different. So I'd like, if I could, to just ask you a couple of specifics. TSIA described a new era of customer and supplier relationships where complexity is just unacceptable. Maybe talk about the complexity factor.
One of the promises of the cloud was it was supposed to remove complexity, and it was going to shift the complexity to a managed service center or to a cloud operation. We saw IT departments decimated in preparation for this happening, sometimes a little too quickly. But today's customer does not want to touch, see, feel complexity. They want an effortless experience. They want easy onboarding, easy learning. They're not going to spend a week in a classroom. They want little bite-sized chunks of digital learning content. They want you monitoring the equipment, detecting issues, fixing it remotely, dispatching someone to replace a part without you ever knowing that this problem is going on. So with fewer IT, you've got business users working directly with technology providers. They don't always have the tech savvy, and they don't want it. We don't have admins anymore. We all are our own administrators. So we just don't have the time or the patience. And there are a lot of studies, Walker, Forrester's done a lot, showing that customers will pay more for better service. And that is really what this is about. They want the sophistication, they want the capabilities, but they don't want the overhead, they don't want the challenges, they just don't want to have to deal with it.
And you said at one point in time, customers expected that kind of service to be highly customized to meet their business requirements. And yet they've since realized that they're incurring a great deal of cost, risk, and complexity, which you call technical debt. Tell me a little bit about how that's changing customers' definition of what good service looks like.
Yeah, I just launched a survey on technical debt. I think it's a fascinating topic. I think we all kind of had a wake-up call when Southwest Airlines had their meltdown in December, which was about outdated equipment. But I see technical debt a lot from highly customized systems. And we have members now who are telling us that they're going to some of these customers with highly customized systems and highly customized service offers and telling them, we can't support you anymore. You are so unusual that you're going to have to pay for a personal technical account manager to manage your account. But what we would prefer is re-implement and go vanilla, and kind of adopt industry best practices and move away from all those customizations, because it's getting in the way of transformation. When you see cloud customers who have so customized their software that they can't upgrade to a new version, which shouldn't even happen in a cloud world, but it happens now. So companies are much more focused on delivering out-of-box fixed price offers. 54% of all professional services engagements now are fixed price repeatable offers. Some vendors have like an ABC implementation option. A is completely out of box. B is slight customization, and C could be an integration to a couple of other systems. But these big 6-month, 9-month implementation projects completely rewriting the data model, it just doesn't happen anymore. And I think vendors are realizing, yes, I'm going to walk away from these massive implementation projects, which made a lot of money, but longer term, it's costing you because those customers aren't getting the value. They're switching to a different provider, and it's really expensive to support them.
We're certainly seeing that here at PTC, where in the past we may have provided platforms that developers could use to create their own custom applications, particularly in the factory or smart connected operations. And now there's an expectation from our customers that we provide them the benefit of having seen these developments many, many times in some sort of an introductory package with a roadmap to allow them to embrace innovation faster than they could develop it on their own. If we're used to that as a software company, how is that impacting equipment manufacturers with their machines?
Well, first of all, as we're introducing these value-added services and consulting offers, monetizing customer success is a huge topic at the moment. The first two most popular monetized success offers are Premier Support, and the third is Business Process Consulting, exactly for that reason. How can you help the customer change the way they operate in order to get more value from the technology? And we know that 46% of professional services teams now have a methodology for creating these value-based offers. But I think it's raising a potential issue. The more business process consulting we do, the more advice we're giving them. You've got to have deep business acumen on every industry, on every company. And I don't think that the generalist service folks that we've had in the past necessarily have those skills. So I do think that we need to be doing a lot more sort of resource forecasting to understand, as people start consuming these offers, what skills are we going to need? And more than half of Gen Z and millennial workers now say they prefer to be gig workers. And I think that, in field service, for example, very few companies are relying on much, maybe 10, 20% of resources from gig workers. I think that's going to become a much more predominant model, because if you suddenly need someone with deep expertise in car manufacturing, you can just find somebody and plug them into that engagement. But if you have to hire and own all of these people with all of this expertise, I think it's just really not a scalable model.
It's interesting that you say that. I mean, before the pandemic, I think the definition of a service worker was proximity. Can I get to the machine and get it restored in a short amount of time? And the pandemic changed all of those models. And now you're seeming to imply that specialist expertise is the more compelling requirement for a field worker. What does that mean for the machine whisperers of the past and the new types of skills we'll be hiring for?
Well, that's a really great topic. So the average age of field techs in North America is 50 plus. And that's a problem, because as they near retirement age, it's very difficult to find anyone with the expertise they have after 20, 30 years in the field. And if you can find them, you probably can't afford them. And I think that we're seeing a move not only toward gig workers to plug in. If you need somebody in Nebraska to work on a tractor, it's much easier to find someone there for a short-term project than fly somebody in. But I also think that we've seen mass adoption of tools like virtual reality, augmented reality in the pandemic, because you couldn't send a field tech on site, but you could send some virtual glasses out and coach a customer or a local, less experienced tech in diagnosing problems and replacing parts. And we're seeing some companies embrace that as they start to lose more of these experienced workers. That, being out in the field 8, 10 hours a day is hard work. And some of the older workers are saying, I just don't want to be schlepping parts in and out of a truck all day. So they can work in corporate and be using these virtual reality tools to coach someone in the field on exactly how to do it. And in that way, that one person's expertise can benefit dozens and dozens of folks in the field. And we're also seeing more companies like Dell are creating programs that you can be certified to replace your own parts and do a lot of your repairs, and we'll just drop ship the parts to you. You can do it yourself. It lowers the cost for you. It lowers the cost for us. Accelerates. You don't have to worry about scheduling someone to come out. So I think that we're really kind of transforming what service delivery means. And in part because we have to, but also there's some really cool technology that can help. I think it's fair to say field service organizations have not always been on the forefront of digital transformation. The average age of warehouse logistics is 10 plus years old. Case management systems, 7 to 8 years old. But with mobility, I think when mobile devices started really transforming the way that field techs worked and everybody had a mobile phone in their pocket, it really opened them up to a lot of these new capabilities like virtual reality. So now we're seeing that the field service organization is on the forefront of digital transformation.
It's funny, I say to my girlfriends that, being able to game and to work with people in a remote setting is a job skill now, not just something you need to force your kids to put down and get outside. I'm all in favor of getting outside.
Yeah, pre-pandemic, I had masking tape over my webcam. So it's funny how far we've come in 3 years.
We certainly have. So for service executives, think back on what the lessons are that you learned from the top IT companies as they went through these waves of adoption sooner than we have in the more general manufacturing world. As I'm a service executive, what advice would you give me are the critical path things I should be investing in understanding and implementing today? And maybe are there some places where I should be taking my foot off the gas?
Well, I can tell you that our inquiry volume on anything related to generative chat is just explosive at the moment. I think there is some incredible potential there. We're all still really figuring out what to do with it. But I think investigating that is good because your employees are already using it. So instead of just worrying about security risks, you should be figuring out how you can incorporate that into the employee experience and the customer experience. But I think most companies are hopefully having that on their roadmap. I think investing in more IoT, Internet of Things capability is important. In the past, a lot of hardware companies were building their own, and I rarely saw that those projects delivered value. They weren't that sophisticated, and they also were very tied to specific hardware releases, and a new version of the machine would come out and none of that worked anymore. And they didn't have the development resources to go rebuild their phone home capabilities. But now it's so sophisticated that you can be really monitoring what's going on in systems and hopefully become much more predictive and proactive. Currently, 0.3% of incidents are resolved by self-healing capabilities. And that's something else that I think companies need to be investing in and partnering with companies like PTC to do, because that is the perfect service experience, is never needing service. And we've been hearing about self-healing for a couple of decades now, but only 0.3 incidents are resolved with this. So, I would be looking at how can we use virtual reality? How can we use more IoT capabilities to do more machine learning, become more predictive about service events? And ultimately, how can we resolve those service events automatically without any human effort involved?
It's funny, I wrote a cheeky blog called How Do You Get People to Pay for Something That They Don't Want, which is a service event and experience. Talk to the service professional who may be listening to us. You were kind enough to write your own blog along with PTC. What are the table stakes that they should be doing to optimize their traditional service delivery, and where can they find new service revenue streams? And how quickly is that mix shifting?
So I think the big focus at the moment, as we've kind of moved away from only caring about the initial closing of a sale, and now we're focused on ARR, annual recurring revenue, we're seeing a lot more attention to some deep analysis of the service experience and what components of the service experience are positively and negatively impacting long-term account value. And we all know what's a good experience and a bad experience, but for every company, how big of an impact each of those has is very different. And so the first step is you've got to do some correlation analysis to really understand what is impacting renewals and expand selling and referrals and net promoter score and things like that. And only like 37% of companies have even started doing that level of customer journey analysis. So that's one step. There is definitely a shift to identifying new revenue streams, and the state of the economy has only accelerated that. We've mentioned value-added services. We're seeing much more subscription services being introduced that customers can consume by points or credits. They buy a pool and then consume them as they need a little help building a dashboard or something. But one of the shifts from revenue is we're seeing that field technicians are now doing revenue work. And one example I talked about in the blog is an industrial printing company that had these field techs that knew the equipment extremely well. They knew the customers extremely well. And when the customers started saying, hey, we need some help configuring equipment or implementing a new printer or getting it set up in a new department, we don't have the IT resources to do that anymore. And now we're seeing that the field techs are doing for revenue work about 50% of the time. So as we see hardware kind of shifting from on-premise to a managed service center, they're going to that managed service center and doing the moves, adds, and changes that the customers need. And all of that is billable. So I do think that service people are delivering value-added services. They're delivering customization services. They're doing on-site training and coaching. So because they have that ability to really work closely with customers and they understand the customers better than the people that build the products do, they're perfectly poised to do that. Sometimes they're a little uncomfortable on the revenue side, but if you present it to them as it's really accelerating their value, it's improving the customer experience, and they like working with you, they're usually happy to add that to their service roster.
Just amazing to see how history kind of repeats itself. I said earlier I had dusted off my bookshelf. When I think about our conversation, the trends that impacted IT companies delivering service in the early days are really applicable to OT companies or mainstream manufacturers implementing new services strategies today. We talked about the complexity avalanche and how customers expect their machine makers to provide them a seamless experience. We talked about bridging the services chasm and helping services professionals deliver their expertise in new ways, in new innovative ways. The reality of consumption economics, where putting all the risk on the customer to get the value out of machine, those days are done. Our customers expect that their suppliers will share in the value and share in the risk of making a promise successful. And then I hearken back to the technology as a service playbook that I read when implementing technology services. John, how about some parting comments from you? What advice would you like to share, closing comments with our readers and listeners?
We've talked a lot about technology and digital transformation, and the one thing we didn't touch on is The biggest failure of digital transformation is change management, and change is hard. Employees struggle with having all of this new capability shoved down their throats. Customers are confused why they've got a new portal and everything works differently. And I see that so many great ideas fall apart because we're not doing the hard work and change management. And that means selling the idea to employees. What's in it for them? What's in it for the customer? What's in it for the company? Why are we doing this project? Identifying stakeholders and influencers in each department who employees kind of look to as a clue to how to act when something new is coming. Involve those people early so they're on your side. And you need some serious marketing out to customers about any change that they're going to notice, why you're doing it, how it's benefiting them, and also sell your successes early. Every digital transformation is made up of 1,000 little transformations. And when you have a success story, you've got to sell that to everybody, because then they're energized, they're ready to participate in the next round. And I think if you can go into any sort of introducing new hardware or new processes or trying to do some transformation, if you focus on that change management piece and remember the people and the process, not just the technology, you've got a much higher rate of success.
Well, I think you've said a lot there. I'd love to have you come back and talk about how our services channel partners are transforming to move away from custom development that incurs that technical debt towards one of helping customers successfully adopt and go through that change management puzzle. Thank you, John, very much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. It was great being here.
Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Service podcast, brought to you by PTC. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave a rating or review. And be sure to check out other episodes to hear new perspectives on improving life for aftermarket professionals, service teams, and the customers they support. If you have a topic of interest or want to provide feedback, email us at speakingofservice@ptc.com or visit us at ptc.com/speakingofservice.